The 1920s is nicknamed the Golden Age of Sports. The United States had a strong economy that caused new and bigger stadiums to be built because more people wanted to go to the games. Yankee Stadium was built in 1923. Road improvements made it possible for Americans to travel to large cities to witness sports events. For the first time in history, Americans were paying money to watch other people compete. Baseball was huge in the 1920s. It was nicknamed the national pastime. The most famous athlete of the 1920s was Babe Ruth, a right fielder for the New York Yankees. Babe Ruth hit more home runs than any other player had hit before. College football was also extremely popular. Schools such as Notre Dame became popular nationwide. Red Grange from the University of Illinois became a household name. Boxing was also huge during the 1920s. Jack Dempsey reigned as the world heavyweight champion from 1919 to 1926. The 1920s was a huge decade for technology since soldiers returned from World War I. Henry Ford's Model T car became popular and more families started buying it. Henry Ford's assembly line made labor fast and easier for their workers. In the late 1920s was when radios made their way into more homes and started becoming accessible. Silent films became a very popular form of entertainment during the 1920s. The 1920s was also a big time for medicine. In 1928, Sir Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, an antibiotic that fights off viruses. The first television was invented in 1927. The 1920s was a period of crime ran by gangsters. The most famous gangster most likely is Al Capone. He was a crime boss of the Chicago outfit. Capone made his money during the Prohibition era by bootlegging. Bootlegging is the illegal manufacture, distribution, or sale of goods, especially alcohol and recordings. Al Capone would rule the gangster world in Chicago for 7 years. Gangsters would make all their money selling alcohol during the Prohibition era. Prohibition was when the United States government banned the manufacturing and distribution of alcohol.
In the 1920s, the automobile changed society by making it easier and quicker to get to destination. The average family could consider owning a car. Manufacturers had found ways to make cars more efficient and safer to drive. Ford was the first auto manufacturer to automate production with an assembly line. Prohibition costed the federal government $11 billion in tax revenue. But the good things that came out of the Prohibition was healthier people and consumer goods. Prohibition succeeded in both lowering consumption and retaining political support. Prohibition was the banning of alcohol in hope that crime would decrease. Prohibition started in 1920 and ended in 1933. Men's fashion in the 1920s influenced today's fashion for men. Men wore suits. These suits were made of thick wool, making them heavier than today's suits. Women changed the way they dressed too. The most famous hat for women in the 1920s was the cloche hat.
The 1920s presented another kind of diversion to America. Radios, films, and sports were all new structures on diversion. The primary radio broadcast that was popularized begun in 1919. Throughout the following decade, radios turned into an enormous achievement. Radios were utilized transmission news, diversion, and commercials. By 1929, a large number of families had radios. There were 800 radio broadcasts, and radios had created $426 million in sales. Films got perhaps the greatest type of diversion during the time as well. Around 75% of Americans would go out to see the film theater week after week. More than 700 movies were produced a year. The actors in the films became celebrities. The films were quiet until 1927. Sound was improvised into the movies. The entertainment world changed American culture and turned into a mainstream type of diversion. Sports were another enormous form of diversion throughout the 1920s. Players became big names and respected. They drew large crowds and motivated them. Sports helped the radio business flourish and was one of the best types of amusement. Most famous people during the 1920s were either in sports, music, or entertainers. The radio celebrated famous people and made them all more notable, all throughout the nation. A few celebrities throughout the 1920s was Babe Ruth, Louis Armstrong, Gloria Swanson, and Jack Dempsey. Babe Ruth is known to be one of the best to ever play the game. He set multiple records to hit. Babe Ruth is known to be one of the best to ever play the game. He set multiple records and hit 714 home runs throughout his whole career. He brought thousands to go see him play and advocated the game. Louis Armstrong began his well-known career during the 1920s. He was one of the most compelling vocalists of his time and helped impact jazz music. Gloria Swanson was one of the most sought actresses in Hollywood. She was likewise a design symbol, and numerous individuals who saw her in motion pictures would attempt to copy her style. Jack Dempsey was an American boxer who contended from 1914 to 1927. He was the heavyweight champion of the world from 1919 to 1926. He was known for his punching power and the aggressive way he fought. He set finance and attendance records, including the initial $1 million gate. The 1920s was an authentic decade for women. The 19th Amendment was passed in 1920, which permitted women to vote. This ended a century-long protest for women to have the right to vote. Women started to wear more convenient clothes for activity and stopped wearing long skirts and corsets. The number of working women increased by 25%. Flappers smoked in public, danced in new dances, and were also sexually liberated. Many women during this time also believed that they should get equal